It's been an historic day for India as it became the fourth country to land on the moon after a failed attempt in 2019 and just days after a failed Russian lunar landing. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi watched alongside the team at the Indian Space Research Organization as the Chandrayaan-3 touched down in the moon's south polar region.
This success belongs to all of humanity. I am confident that all countries in the world, including those from the global south, are capable of achieving such.
This isn't just a first for India, it's a first in lunar exploration. No one successfully landed near the moon's south pole before, and it's a place of real interest for space science and also space exploration. It's one of the coldest places in the solar system, where water and other important chemicals are frozen in deep, shaded craters.
If we can go and land a spacecraft there, drive a rover around, take a sample, analyse it, then we can actually measure samples that could be 1 billion years old, who've just been waiting there for us to analyse and discover. And it'll tell us about how the solar system used to be, what were the conditions like when Earth formed.
And if rovers can confirm abundant, accessible frozen water at the moon's pole, that's a potential resource. Water and oxygen for a future moon base. Water, too, can be used to make rocket fuel. That raises the prospect of the moon as a staging post for fueling trips back to Earth or on to Mars. And right now, the moon has never been busier. In May, Japan's iSpace crashed on landing. At the weekend, Russia's Luna 25 failed to go into orbit and crashed too. India, of course, has just landed successfully. This Saturday, Japan's space agency is launching SLIM, its high-tech robotic moon lander. In November, we're expecting the launch of 2 NASA-funded missions, again to the moon's south pole. Next year, NASA is planning to send astronauts around the moon as part of its Artemis mission, and China is planning a robotic moon mission for next year also. So we can expect more heroic robotic landings and possibly a few new craters. But all this activity raises the controversial question of who owns the moon. In the 1967 Outer Space Treaty prohibits any territorial claims, but it doesn't say much about exploiting resources in space. NASA has drafted the so-called Artemis Accords, a set of principles that would allow the use of lunar resources for the benefit of humanity. 28, mainly Western nations, have signed up. India has joined them. But Russia and China are opposed, saying these accords only serve American interests. As in the Cold War past, it seems our moon will continue to reflect political differences here on Earth.
Joining me now to discuss this monumental moment is science correspondent Miles O'Brien. Hey, Miles, good to see you.
Good to see you, Amna.
So tell us about this Indian mission. What are its goals?
Well, its primary goal has been accomplished. The Indian Space Research Organization wanted to prove it could land a lander softly at the south pole of the moon. No nation has ever done this. India becomes the fourth nation to land on the moon anywhere, but the first at the south pole of the moon. So it's already accomplished its minimal mission goal. Now we're waiting for the tiny rover Pragyan, which weighs about as much as a checked-on bag, to roll off the ramp of the Vikram lander and spend a little bit of time surveying the Martian surface at the South Pole, conducting experiments to understand its elemental composition, its seismicity. And the biggie here, Amna, is ice water. The more we know about what the situation is there for water at the South Pole, the more scientists get interested in this place.
So, as we mentioned, the Russians tried earlier and failed. They wanted to beat the Indians to make it to the moon. But what happened to that Russian attempt? What went wrong?
Well, this is a bit of a tortoise and hare story. The Russians launched much later on sort of a beeline mission to the moon. The Indian space program takes a much more fuel-efficient and generally efficient approach. Their launch was more than a month ago, and they slowly but surely nudged their orbit closer and closer to the moon to save fuel, to save weight, to save cost. The Russians tried to sprint. We don't know exactly what happened, but as it descended and tried to reach the surface of the moon, something went wrong, and it made yet another crater in the moon, as if it needed that. It's probably a reflection of the financial stresses that the Russian space program faces, certainly in the wake of the Ukraine invasion. But even before that, it had lost a lot of its commercial space enterprise and business to the likes of SpaceX. So the Russian program is a shell of what it once was, for sure.
So, Miles, tell us a little more about why the south pole of the moon in particular seems to be attracting more visitors now. And is this what's basically fueling sort of a moon race 2.0?
Yeah, it's kind of fun to watch. It's very different this go round. It is interesting that in 2009, the Chandrayaan-1, which was a moon orbiter, carried an instrument built by NASA, which made the first discovery.
India has become the fourth nation to safely land a spacecraft on the moon, following the United States, Russia, and China, where few have gone before.
जी हाँ, आप अपनी स्क्रीन पे देख सकते हैं कि हम
India is also the first to land its Chandrayaan craft near the moon's south pole. Scientists believe this uncharted territory could hold vital reserves of frozen water, which can be used as fuel for future missions. Leroy Chiao joins me now. He's a former NASA astronaut and former commander of the International Space Station. We're so happy to have you with us. So put this into perspective. How big of a deal is this?
Well, this is a pretty big deal. You know, India has been an up-and-coming space power, and they've had a number of successes over the years. They've developed sophisticated rocket engines and rockets. They're planning to try to put their first astronaut into orbit in the next year or two. And so coming along and actually landing a lander, only the fourth nation to do so on the surface of the moon, soft landing, and the first nation to put a lander down near the South Pole, those are pretty big accomplishments.
Explain in this answer what a soft landing is, but I'll ask the question first, which is Russia tried to make a soft landing on the moon's southern pole, and it didn't go very well. It crashed. Why is that region drawing so much interest right now?
Well, the South Pole is drawing interest, the South Pole of the moon, because there are parts of the South Pole that never see the sun. And so the idea is perhaps there is water ice at or near the surface. In fact, certain measurements have indicated there's a lot of water ice in those regions. And so, as you mentioned briefly in your report, that water ice could be extracted and used to make rocket fuel, by separating the hydrogen and the oxygen. Of course, if you're going to establish a lunar base, that ice could be used for drinking water, and the oxygen could also be used for breathing, right? And so there are a lot of resources, there are minerals that are deposited there, we believe, and so for all those reasons, the South Pole is attractive.
The United States plans to land humans on the moon in 2025. How have our priorities changed since the last time in 1972?
Yes, so the U.S. is hoping to land astronauts again. This would be the first landings, of course, since 1972, as you pointed out. These are different because the goals are different. The goal's not just to get there, as it was in the 60s during the Apollo program, during the space race. The idea was to beat the Soviets to the surface of the moon with astronauts. Having won that, this time we're looking to sustainably go there. That is, we've got an architecture that would allow us to explore the moon for a certain or a longer length of time. So that would involve a small space station called a gateway that would orbit the moon, and it would be a staging area for astronauts to go down to the surface, and also a staging area to possibly go further into space, one day to Mars. So we're looking to go explore the moon to stay this time, and that's really the big difference.
And explain that to me, Leroy. Would there ever be an instance in which you would set up shop on the actual moon itself as opposed to orbiting around it?
Yes, so you would go down to the moon, you would have some kind of a habitat there. You wouldn't necessarily have it permanently crewed. That means that is to say there wouldn't necessarily always be humans there, but it would be a research facility. It would be a facility where you could gather samples, things like that to bring back to the Earth. And so, you know, for the jumping off point of the moon, probably you would have your vehicle that would travel, you know, farther into space, be in orbit around the moon, and use that gateway as a place where astronauts could transfer to that vehicle. So there are a lot of different things being looked at, but the main point is this time we're not just dashing out for a few missions to kind of show that we can do it. The idea is to actually get some more scientific data and use it for an operational training base and other things, you know, to prepare to go to Mars.
I can't wait. Former NASA astronaut Leroy Chiao, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.